I mean, it's like a false front of a Hollywood set. You look at these things from the wrong angle, and you say, well, that's absurd. I mean,
Yes,
Murphy's Laws and so on and so forth.
Well, for example?
Well, our educational system is, one of the worst examples. We have really various curricula that are designed to turn out specialists, people who have some narrow base of controlled knowledge and understanding. And I mean, this is in spite of the fact that the modern era is the most revolutionary, not just technologically, but socially, politically, culturally. As different as the present world is from the world in which your parents grew up, or their parents, we can count on the fact that another generation, another 2 generations, we will have left most of the premises, most of the cultural climate behind. We need to understand something. We need more desperately than other societies to understand what the motives and drives and impulses are that cause our culture to flow in a certain direction, because it's changing things. It's changing especially the intangibles, the elusive, subjective conditions of what we want, how we see things, and, as I emphasize, far more importantly, the things we can't understand, the things we've lost our grip on. I mean, we're losing our grip on the English language. I try to explain what technical terms I have to make use of in introductory philosophy classes, but the level of vocabulary of college students has generally shriveled down to, such a primitive base. Inevitably, I'm so sick of hearing the expression, what would that be in English? Well, the sad reality is this is English, and the college students hardly qualify as masters of their own native tongue any longer. It was obvious to me something was gravely amiss when I started noticing foreign students, foreign professors, etc., who knew the English language better than not just most students, but most faculty. There's something gravely amiss within the universe of our little cultural envelope. Something has been changing. We're stopping. We're ceasing to cultivate wonder about some very important issues, and they are the issues on which the drift of our culture is pivoting. If we had the right kind of perspective, something that overarched not just decades and generations, but centuries. In all the years that I was teaching courses in the history of philosophy and classical civilization and so forth, at the back of my mind, the larger framework of those cultures was shaping up. No matter how much of a rationalist Plato is, he's not a rationalist of the sort that modern rationalists are, because he has a certain binding cultural worldview. He takes for granted various things about nature, even though this may be a weaker understanding of nature than Aristotle has, or other more traditional Greeks. To be any sort of a Greek at all meant to take for granted the growing, urgent, pregnant world in which things just burgeon. Mm-hmm. And we still have these experiences. We all know what it's like to try and take care of a garden or mow a lawn or try to cut back on the infection of the household or the dishes or whatever by germs. We know what proliferant nature is like. Mm-hmm. But we don't think of it as a concept. We don't think of it as a world. It's an entire dimension of our existence in which we're susceptible to nature. And that still affects us in our appetites. That still affects us in our health, in our psychology, etc. There are whole realms, domains, in which nature owns us. It is the authority over us. And if we don't understand it, then we don't understand how to master it. And we're kidding ourselves that we are master of our own psychologies, when in fact we are so manipulable through our appetites, desires, etc. We can hardly be said to be anything other than slaves. The susceptibility to advertising, susceptibility to mass popular culture, and so on, these are phenomena that have never before existed in the extent and in the strength that they exist today. I mean, Flaubert was describing something significant when he described the arising of creatures such as Madame Bovary, creatures who have a pathetic sense of dependency on fictions, fantasies, and so forth. They've lost something of the aristocratic critical distance. I mean, the Greeks, as you know, the famous formula that Aristotle uses, the Greeks well understood when you go into a drama, you're cultivating the willing suspension of disbelief. Yeah. They were masters enough of the art of trying to determine what the truth is, how to think critically, how to keep critical distance from the various claims that people make when they argue politics, philosophy, religion, etc. Fast forward to the late 20th century, when the people who play villains on soap operas keep getting arrested because somebody thinks they've seen their picture on a wanted poster or whatever. I mean, they look like villains, okay? And fans write into the soap operas and so forth who can't begin to distinguish fantasy, fiction from reality. They think the villains and villainesses are really the kinds of creatures they're playing. They have no concept of roles, scripts, characters, all the apparatus of televised fiction.
Yeah, a lot of television actors have stories about that when they meet their fans and they think they're their character.
Yeah, it's frightening. You think the average human being has at least a minimal critical apparatus. That's not necessarily the case. Just as, we can suppose in abstracto all human beings have some degree of willpower, some degree of conscience. There has to be something like values, but the reality is all of these things human beings have to cultivate. Yeah. And we are a society of subjective license. You don't have to do anything. If you don't want to have a conscience, you don't have to have a conscience. If you don't want to have to have willpower, you can go through your life as an addict to this, that, and the other thing. We have de-defined human being. There's nothing that human beings can't become. There are human beings who want to become software. There are human beings who want to become vampires and werewolves, and they are religiously committed to the proposition that that's what they will become. The line between fantasy and reality, really the whole line between truth and delusion, has been eroded by I don't know how to describe it, the human implications, the covert implications of a scientific, objective culture. We think we've zeroed in on the objective truth more perfectly than any other culture. In effect, all we've done is pull carpet out from under ourselves with respect to those things that really matter to human beings and the human application of knowledge, understanding, judgment, etc. I have a suspicion that the history of the 20th century is not going to be able to be written at all significantly by someone who makes use of official sources such as newspapers, government documents. Most of, not just in, of course, in wartime, most of all, but not just in wartime, whole campaigns of disinformation, misinformation, We are just now starting to figure out the systematic lies that went down, in the midst of World War II.
Yes.
These things have been carried on. They've been promulgated by subsequent historians as if they were fact. Will we ever know who assassinated whom? Will we ever know who manipulated the market in order to make a killing of some sort?
Yeah.
The possibility of making use of the puppetry of our various institutions is so facile, it's so easy to carry off. And of course, as long as one is successful, doesn't blunder like the Hunt brothers trying to corner the world silver market or whatever, as long as one is successful, it's like the crimes that are really successful never really get publicized, declared as crimes, etc. We may have defined the very concept of historical truth out of existence in this licentious culture. That's one of the extremes that a culture of nihilism has made possible.
Well, someone like David Brin might say that even though there are these crimes in the past, at least there are circles and pockets of activity that are trying to uncover these and trying to shed light on it. And in times past, that might not have been the case. And so he might say that there would be some means for optimism, just because there are people who are worried about this and trying to circulate publicity for these.
But individuals as individuals are eminently negligible. They're statistically insignificant. And as long as there is no pervasive culture, no shared culture of common norms, standards, critical concepts, etc., as long as it's merely the private, esoteric understanding of a tiny group, that is as good as gone. It's as good as not there. In the first place, those individuals are all mortal. And it's no accident that the things they understand cannot be communicated to other people. It's because those other people have been educated not to be able to comprehend those things. And where something like a broad spectrum of the population comes to wonder about these things, always it's with lack of psychological controls. I mean, it's more paranoia that drives the general public to wonder, who's manipulating this, et cetera, et cetera. Every kind of how should I describe it? Every kind of footless, baseless paranoia that has ever existed in the past, whether it's suspicions about anti-Semitism or racism or whatever. All these things are they're still open. There are people whose ideological preference is to deny that such a thing as the Holocaust ever happened. And in a licentious culture, they're free to assume that. No one has to accept anything because this is a culture that doesn't have any axiomatic truths. There's nothing necessary. Everything is willful, optional. It's a consumer culture, and people choose what they like to believe. And this is just a different way of saying we believe that the essence of human personality consists in subjectivism. Now, arbitrary will is the founding precept of our culture, and it's a concept that we have not got any philosophical or religious or metaphysical perspective on, to be able to realize what the consequences of it are. It turns human beings into infantile creatures who have no control, no discipline over themselves. It turns human beings into radically gullible creatures. They think they're freer than ever before, but really they're more pathetic than ever before. And our peculiar form of manipulative or Machiavellian authoritarianism is just as delighted as it could be that human beings want to think that's what freedom is.